Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of In Your Wheelhouse, brought to you by Wheelhouse IT. I am your host, Todd Rosales. And remember, if it's not in your wheelhouse, don't reinvent it. We've had some great guests going on today. We've had people from the nonprofit world. We've had people from FP&L. We had Brian Norcross give us some great information about how to prepare for disaster, how to leverage technology. We've talked to our nonprofit clients about how they're leveraging technology to be able to deliver their services during the course of a pandemic. But today we're going to back up and we're going to take a different topic, right? A lot of the conversations that we've had today are very topical about right now and what's going on at this point in time. Not that this conversation isn't going to be that, but one thing that you always have to consider when getting into business or just being in business in general, even for your own self, if you're an independent contractor or if you're an employee, is branding, marketing, personal branding, and really the story that your brand or your company is going to tell. All of these are extremely important. I know, I have a big affinity for the show Mad Men. Mad Men, right? I get confused with companies of the same name now, but Mad Men and Don Draper, I thought had one of the coolest jobs in the world. Now, my guest today may not be having mimosas at his morning meetings and he may not be smoking cigarettes in the boardroom, but he is a modern day Don Draper. He is a creative expert and he is a friend of Wheelhouse, and I'm very happy to have him here today. Please welcome Dave Pappas, the owner and creative director for the Dave Pappas Creative Studio. Thanks for joining me, man.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for that wonderful intro. It's exciting to get to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. If Madman came out when I was in high school, I'd probably be in your shoes right now because I just watching Don Draper, not so much like the degenerate things he did, but when he would be in the meeting and he came up with that idea and just getting into the pitch and had everybody in the palm of his hands was one of the coolest things in the world. Like it
It
doesn't
really,
get cooler than that.
it really
So
is.
is that
I,
real? Is
I,
that real life?
I love that show, and that is a great question too, because someone like me, I've been in the creative business for 24 years now, and I started off more in traditional advertising in the early 90s. But that show was a great show, in context for its time, relative to like even how the men treated the women at the meetings, much different than the males in terms of decision making, and
Yeah.
how it was a cultural taboo to even have certain females even in the room itself. And like, well, that sets the tone in terms of the time zone. I mean, the time frame, right? But it's a great show in that, yes, to a degree, that is the old school way of coming up and brainstorming. And it's usually, oh, there's this magical person, usually a guy, there's a magical guy in the room that is, and you nailed it before, is a great storyteller. Okay? A great storyteller combined with intuition, reading the room, understanding what people want to hear, but delivery. It's the delivery. So you inferred it in the opening. I'm kind of the delivery guy, not Don Draper style anymore. Although, like I said, in the late '90s, we were all about telling great stories, and we were able to do so because there was a lot less noise, right? So you can come up with kind of a unique story that people would be more interested in listening to for minutes or even hours, right? Now it's like you've got 8 seconds. Why am I going why am I going to jump into this person or this organization's story? And yeah, I talk a lot about story with my clients, and I think I've almost you know matured away from the one man thinking show, even though that's what I've been for a very long time. And the past decade or so, have really designed with my clients and with my teams and with people around me, including asking and throwing out big cultural questions, as Don Draper did, that, hey, this is not going to work because I believe the psychological makeup of the American consumer is XYZ. So there's a logic there, and they deliver it with a story, but now we've got the American consumer psyche in data and analytics, right? So we've got Don Draper's robots
Yeah.
all over the place, and it's a different world. So yeah, it's interesting that, and I'm excited about digging into the weeds too about how things have changed these 24 years that I've been in the business, starting out as a graphic designer, then an art director, then an interactive art director, then maturing to a creative director and a project manager, and now just sort of handling the business and empowering others in those roles.
Dude, that's incredible, because to me, you're one of these unicorns, right? They say a lot of creative people don't get into business, but not only are you a creative who's in business, but you're also an entrepreneur, and then you're able to take your business sense and the trends, and like you said, combine that with psychology and sociology, and then your just creative self with your art and your vision, and make that into a business. I think it's a rarity, and people like you are rare in this industry. A lot of people can recreate things that they've seen, but to come up with an idea from scratch to run with it and be able to execute on it is rare. So I sit on the sales side of the house in most of my jobs and the roles that I've had. I will probably be one of the first salespeople to actually admit that we can't do what we do without marketing and without branding. Like, we're the megaphones, but you guys are the mouth behind the megaphones, giving us the messaging and the branding and everything else that we do to get our job done. So, I want to go kind of on that vein that you talked about, right? How have things changed in the 24 years that you've done this? Because technology over the past 24 years has increased exponentially. I would love to understand how the processes are different. You talk about attention spans. We don't have a long time to get people's attention anymore. It's quick hits. It's viral videos. It's people getting hit in the face with volleyballs and stuff like that. Now, you've
A lot
got
of
the
cats,
older
a lot of cats.
a lot of cats, a lot of cats. You've got the computer over your shoulder there that obviously is not recent. So just take us on a journey, very briefly on what it was like when you got into the industry versus how you're doing things today.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'll try to formulate my story here of my journey. I like that framing. So, yeah, like I mentioned, for 24 years, I've been a creative, and I define that now as sort of someone that, as you mentioned, Todd, like, thinks about things that are new or innovative, and is able to have those conversations and discussions. And I would say back in, the early, 1994, I had my first kind of full-time job at an advertising agency out in Long Island in New York. And it was a great experience because at the time, that agency was serving 1-800-Flowers. And it was before they even had .com in their name. So that, there was no e-commerce at the time. They were one of the first flower brands, really the biggest one, to just go online and simply have a catalog online, right? And it blew my mind that that's possible. And back in the 90s, and then, forums started to arise where, wow, I could like fix my motorcycle that I have in the garage because I can go to a forum and ask someone about it instead of having to go to the library or car shop and find my model and wait 2 months for that catalog on back order. So the 90s, early 90s, all of the 90s were just this really magical time, for internet innovation and creation. It was a playing field. And I was lucky enough to start my career during that, really creative time where we were building a lot of Flash-based websites. I don't know if you or your audience are familiar with Flash. Back in the day before it was Macromedia Director. Macromedia was a separate company before Adobe bought it, and they had their little Director and Shockwave plugins that were trying to make the web more dynamic at the time. And I made all these CD-ROMs. I remember back in the day that you'd put in, and the CD-ROM would tell a story with a video and take you on an adventure with a person's product or catalog from a company.
Just to interject, man, I mean, you're bringing me back into the day where every single magazine that we would get came with an AOL CD. And I mean, if you look back at the websites that were created back in 98, 99, 2000 versus the ones that we have today, it's comical. Not to cut you off, but you're just bringing back memories that I haven't thought of in a long time, but go on.
No, absolutely. It was a different era in expression, digital expression, I'll call it, different era. And you in a way we were time boxed in blocks because the modems, you're doing a lot of effort and legwork to get online. So and the web was more pure then, meaning the content you landed on was more than likely something that someone took a lot of effort and attention to build up. And nowadays it's more automated, right? So yeah, it was so interesting to sort of start my career at this time when technology was relatively new in terms of these digital experiences. And to your point, we're getting in the mail these CD-ROMs, popping them in, and kind of in awe about how we can have a little targeted movie or story that we could follow along the lines of. And it's funny you mentioned AOL because, yeah, I was one of the freelancers back in the mid 90s, this guy James hired me, and I went to his agency, and I was so impressed with the agency atmosphere. And this was out in Long Island. And he said, Dave, AOL is our biggest account, and we pump out dozens of CDs each month based on the region, right? And that's when I first got my inclination of how big brands really did segment their audiences, mail out different CDs to different regions that had different stories on them. And I am here in the background actually writing storyboards and sketching storyboards for, okay, you know, that little AOL icon or paperclip, or it was a triangle, a yellow triangle.
Yeah.
Come on. And, you know, I would have the art come on, it would speak, and I'd do the animations, and then it would take you onto a website and show you some free AOL mail features, that kind of thing. And it was a fascinating time because it was just like we were all jumping into like creating many, you know, we had a lot of creative teams because there was so much we could do with this new technology. So it empowered a lot of geeks like me that, you know, wanted to make movies and draw comic books. But, you know, how do you get into that field? I don't really know it. And I wanted to be an illustrator in college. That's really where I went to school up in New Paltz in upstate New York. Sculpting and illustration was what I was all about. And when I tried to hit the market as a professional illustrator, it was my dream in the mid 90s and early aughts, 2000s to, like, you know, be the illustrator for a column in whatever, Newsweek, New York Times.
Yeah.
You know, that was the thing, right? And you know, I wasn't able to compete. I wasn't, you know, that talented compared to who was out there. But knowing how to be able to draw and sketch really took me far back then, because I could draw a storyboard very quickly with a client, and we could throw it in the garbage and do a new one without spending a lot of money. And then I actually was interested in the technology production side, so I'd actually produce it myself. And I was so curious as to, you know, how I could be empowered in a way that a team took many months and meetings before. So that really opened my eyes to, like, wow, I want to stay in this business. And I started off mostly in print and event, but quickly translated to interactive design, they call it, right, at the time, to these kind of CD animations, and then websites like 1-800-Flowers and big pharmas like Novartis, where back in the day, to your point, you'd land on a web page and it looked completely different. Usually it was, there were animations and heavy textures, and you had to kind of find your way. But in a way, we were okay with that because it was new territory.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of miss about that time. And we've no longer got that. Now it's more like, wow, what do I shove aside so that I can focus my attention?
100. Well, let me ask you a question, man. And I'm always enthralled by entrepreneurs and what brought them in to do what they do. You know, I think I had similar ambitions back in the day when I was a kid. I would draw Spider-Man and Batman and Superman and so many more Marvel superheroes that people only know of now because of the movies. But, you know, when we were kids and before that, when you became an artist, your path was, you know, do you want to draw comic books? Do you want to draw for a cartoon? I always wanted to go the cartoonist route, and it seems like similar, right? You seem to have a little bit of a comic book background, but there's so many people, great artists at the time that found their skill young that are competing for those jobs, where you kind of got to hone your skill in an area where artists were not flocking to yet. There weren't a ton of true artists and real creative people in advertising and in business, and especially in web design. It just, I don't, maybe I'm wrong, and I was a little young at the time, so I didn't see it. So I'm either being ignorant, but I feel like it gave you an area it gave you the ability to compete in an area where there wasn't a ton of people focusing on it that, you know, maybe had a little bit more skill from you. And it gave you the ability to hone your skills and realize, okay, not only do I like this, but I'm also really good at it and I'm getting better. And realistically, by following and taking this path, it was the best outcome for you because now you have your own business and, you know, you're doing great.
I got lucky, right? I mean, I got lucky. You know, in the era that I was introduced to creative brainstorming and production, to your point, tied in with my passion for, you know, sculpture and art and illustration. I love to draw faces in black and white, and I was really obsessed with old school engravings. Just the purity of, like, you know, someone spending so much time back in the day with these archaic tools, really making these beautiful pieces of art. And we've lost a lot of that with the computer, right? But yeah, my passion for that was essentially brought to bear with, okay, now I can, you know, make a living to your, you know, out of something that is not quite art, right? It really isn't, even though maybe I would have said that differently when I was younger. There's some expression involved, but all of the work that we do in design, and specifically my work in creative communications, is framed with a business goal in mind, or with something that we're telling a story towards, that we're going to learn from and move forward. So to iterate a little bit more about my story and my journey too, from the 90s onward, I noticed back in mid and late 90s, advertising, of course, took a team of editors to curate something, and things took quite a bit of time to develop and deliver. So the biggest difference between then and now is just the speed and volume of the stuff that we have to pump out the door now compared to back then. We just have so many more meetings about a single web page or a single, experience. Whereas now you're pumping those things out the same day or the next day because you found some new learnings or findings and need to create a landing page to handle it so that you can sign up enough people for the webinar in a few days. And then you also find a technical issue along the way that takes your attention away from that. And there are all these variables and additional factors where back in the 90s, I'd create a home page, a sub page, 3 versions of it, and we'd have discussions for weeks with the client and comparison and competitive analysis.
Some clip art.
But what's that?
Some clip art you throw on there, maybe some nice font that sparkles.
Exactly. And different versions of it where we could take our time to talk about sparkles. I don't like sparkles. Why don't you like sparkles? Don't you think sparkles will get someone's attention? And there was a slower pace to the conversation, and we made decisions. Whereas now the decision-making process moves so fast that a lot of quality falls through the cracks. And I would say a lot of impact. I almost challenge my clients now to realize that we are playing in a different era. I mean, we know that, it's obvious, but there's so much noise out there that I'd rather slow our roll and have fewer stories to tell if the stories are going to be more impactful and engaging and curated to the taste of the audience. So yeah, that's changed a lot, the pace in which we're brainstorming an idea and then delivering it, but that has its consequences as well.
Do you think in today's modern times, with the internet and the fight for attention and everything kind of moving to the screen, I follow a lot of business motivators, guys like Gary Vaynerchuk, people who talk about putting content out there, and every company almost needs to have either a media division or kind of be somewhat of a light media company these days, because there is such a war for attention, right? So, you see Super Bowl ads these days are being done by world-renowned directors and things like that. And obviously these companies have the multi-million-dollar budgets to do it, but would you say some of the work that you're doing, I know your work is different because it's not just the creative. You come up with the strategy, you come up with plans, strategic, which is really cool to me because you get to mix business and psychology. I talked about that. But just as far as a lot of the content that you're creating, mini commercials that are almost like mini movies, trying to get viral videos, or we'll go to something like the UPS commercials with the guy whiteboarding, just something catchy that you almost have to be, as a marketing or a creative studio, like a mini Hollywood studio there to keep up with the content and the times.
In a way, yes. Yeah. And Hollywood would be confined to entertainment, and they have had technology for years that they've mastered and have research and development and research and innovation departments, right? But most companies don't have a media department, as you're inferring. They may have a marketing manager, but they may not have a department that does research and keeps up with technology and understands how it could actually help business goals and empower other departments. Hollywood's done that because they've got the money, because they've got the attention of so many consumers that feed them so much money. So what I'm seeing now in the conversation, especially with technology startups, are let's spend our money wisely. Let's not go Hollywood. Right? That used to be a term. Let's go Hollywood on this. And tech has had its heyday. Tech has spent the money on the pool tables and the culture, and the going all in on these large apps that, quite frankly, now aren't necessarily making very much money. I mean, Uber is not super profitable necessarily. Amazon is now on a lucky streak, but so there are big problems and flaws and blind spots with some of these enterprises when they get too large that you can't really predict before you do it. But then you can't deal with it in the same way that a small, nimble shop could. And you bring up the point, but those small, nimble shops, and most of us don't have media companies, but we've got to think like one. So we've got more power in our cell phone now than they ever did in the 80s or the 90s with a media company in terms of the processing power, our access to information. Now our principles on how we decipher what's true or not is going to be different on a per person basis, right? But we've got these powerful media tools in our pocket and within our reach. And I think it's my opinion that technology is moving too fast for our brains to really synthesize and catch up en masse. There's always going to be lots of techies and people, but we're still dealing with the effects of the fact that we're being tracked by commercial entities, let alone government or other things, and we haven't really had a full conversation about it. We're all in beast mode, buying and contributing capitalism and to your point, participating in the war for our attention, so much so that we never used to have this. We have to have like retreats from our phones and retreats from our screens. And we're hearing doctors and others say, well, research studies say, well, if you look at a screen an hour before bed, look at the sleep patterns, and then you judge for yourselves. But this blue light's really hurting us, so try not to look at a screen an hour before you go to sleep, and you'll notice a difference in your sleep patterns and rhythm. So this is new to us. It's moving faster than our brains and our biology and our evolution can keep up with. And that's been hard to keep up with in my mind too, because back in the 90s, early 2000s, a new feature technology thing would come out and we'd know how to deal with it and talk about it. Now these things come out every few months. It's almost Minority Report now. Like there are companies that are tracking you on a device per device basis, have access to your information in real time. Asia is a bit further ahead than us in this realm, but we're going to get there with 5G and with telecommunication evolutions. That you'll be walking into an Old Navy store, and someone in the back room will get on their phone, and they're hanging out at lunch, whatever. A salesperson gets a text that says, "Todd just walked into Old Navy," and maybe they don't even know your name. Anonymous walked into Old Navy, but Anonymous, we know because he shared with us, it's a he, and he's purchased this shirt in this color 4 times. And it's not on the shelf. Go get it right now in real time. So the salesperson will take it, walk through the Old Navy, and you might even be walking in. Oh, that's my color shirt that I like. So it's all. It is all. A psychological. Terror if utilized the wrong way, because it all depends on who holds this power and what you can do with it. And then the salesperson says, "Hey, I like your shirt. You're into the Giants. You're into this team. What's your name, Todd?" And then he goes to the back room. The guy's name's Todd. And depending on the legal framework and who owns the phones and the network, you're allowed to record that information. Not if you're the government, but if you're a commercial entity, you are allowed to sometimes record that information. And now, what? The next time you go to Old Navy in a different state, someone's going to walk up to you and say, "Todd, good to see you. Hey, your beard looks good." Who is this guy? I've never met this person before. Now, we're not there yet, but we will be there. And maybe our kids will be comfortable with that. It would creep us out, but that's where it's going, because it's that way in other countries now. And unfortunately, that is where it's going here because it's the way we're made up. We're a business. We're a capitalist society. So the money is going to make the experiences.
Well, that scares the crap out of me, because I buy T-shirts from Old Navy often. So I don't know if you're working with them, Dave, but please delete my information, because I have many times bought the same T-shirt 3 or 4 times, because I am a creature of habit. So stop tracking me, Dave. But no, you're 100% right. I mean, the way that technology has come from so long ago to be able, it is scary. It's scary to know what companies know about us, but it's kind of, and I think you probably have to deal with this in your job all the time, it's a balance between Ritz-Carlton type service where they know your name, they call you by name, they meet your needs because they have information on you, but you're in that Ritz-Carlton environment, so you're expecting it, right? And you love that service there. Mr. Pappas, what can we do for you? We know that you like your coffee with cream and 2 sugars. Here's your coffee. We booked a 2 o'clock tea. Obviously I'm making generalizations. We booked a 2 o'clock tea time for you because we're sure you wanted to get out and play golf. When you're at the Ritz or a luxury resort or somewhere like that, you expect that and you're blown away by it. But if I walked into Old Navy and, they had a curated outfit for me and I was in Orlando when I live in South Florida, and I'm just like, I'd be like, whoa, wait, who's watching me? What do you know? So I'm curious, I feel like a lot of it has to do with the environment. And I know we joke about going off on tangents. I think I'm the one who's taking us off on a tangent here, but like, I started working in the corporate world in 2008, 2010, and I can't imagine how the Don Drapers of the world and people before my time did anything without a computer on their desk. Like, in my head, I look at a desk, I'm like, what'd you guys do with all this desk real estate before you had a computer? I mean, there was a phone, a pencil, and some paper, but you had these big, massive mahogany desks. I don't get it. But going back to my rant before, how often are you having these data collecting, data mining, technology conversations with people to give them the proper insight so you guys can take action on stuff? I know there are things, and I'm going to butcher all of this, like geofencing and targeted ads and data collection. And then where we would come in from a Wheelhouse is we help those organizations make sure that the data they're collecting is compliant, it's stored correctly, it's encrypted. Things like GDPR you had mentioned. There are certain ways where you can collect data. It has to be able to be deleted at the request of the person. If we have people coming in from Europe, California has their Consumer Privacy Act. I know New York's working on an act as well too. You're probably much more familiar with that because you're in New York. Are these data conversations, we'll call them, the technology conversations that you're having with the people you work with today?
I am. Yeah, great question. And I'll back up a bit to comment on something that resonated with me that you said.
Please.
When you went on your tangent about Don Draper. What was it? I lost my train of thought.
How people worked before we were able to have computers. What you guys did with all that desk real estate.
Exactly. Well, how they worked before was you could hide behind your personality, right? It's the best storyteller, and the shaman on the hill saying the lightning behind us is, the gods telling us we got to get our act together. Let's sacrifice someone. That's a great story. Let's do what that person says, right? You don't have technology to tell you what the weather is all about, and then you do, and we don't sacrifice people anymore. Same thing with the old school 50s, 60s, 80s. Those days we didn't have the data and analytics, so you could actually drive a brand solely with personality, or at the very least get folks' attention that way, and then hopefully over time deliver, or else you lose marketplace. But it went a lot further than it does now. Now you can't hide behind personality, and that's a good thing because there's more transparency. So I wanted to comment on that, and then to take a step back to talk about, before we get into the weeds about why people are even okay with our data being collected, the two principles that I keep in mind a lot as a communications professional is trust and friction. So friction is what you opened up with, the question of walking into a high touch, high glove environment. You don't expect there to be friction because you have an expectation of a certain experience, and you're willing to give up a little bit of your personal privacy in that scenario, but maybe not in Burger King.
Yeah.
But why is that? Two reasons: friction and trust. I'm willing to remove the friction in the first scenario because I've already established and built trust with that experience or that brand. Okay. Whereas Burger King, I don't really know. I feel like they're more massive. Now, that could be true or false. That's what's so fascinating about this, right? It's just a perception. And you could ride that perception all the way to the bank, but only for so long. You get hacked, someone shares information, and then your brand's trust is dead or flawed, and there may need to be some repair there. So this is top of mind on a lot of conversations we have when we're building apps and even new websites that collect people's emails. I'm actually in Florida. I grew up in New York, and in Elmont, New York, and then I moved to Brooklyn, New York, Bay Ridge, about 17 years ago, where I met my wife, and my wife was from Florida. We recently, 3 years ago, just moved down to Lakeland, Florida, right in between Tampa and Orlando. And it's been a fascinating experience for me culturally to move from Brooklyn to Florida, but also to observe the technology conversation and how that takes place, especially now that we're all kind of working from home remotely. And because, by the way, we're working all home remotely, we may want less friction when it comes to getting our work done. But wait a second, don't we need to think about our security? I have a kid going to school 9 weeks virtually until they figure it out, but there are obvious security paradigms that our laptops don't have the most secure software. We're on Zoom or other platforms that the schools are trying to figure out are more secure. So there are all these new issues we have to think about that cause friction in our own lives. And sometimes we just want to let it go and say, all right, I'll give you my name, my address, Amazon, and my credit card, of course, because I see the value and the results of these boxes coming to me. Not only that, I'm emotionally attached to those brown boxes. They're like, wow, I remember ordering this. It's a completely different experience than going to DMV, where you might not check off a box that says, I own this kind of car or this piece of equipment because I think they might sell something to me. And it is weird. It doesn't make sense, but that's a trust issue. I don't trust one organization over another because of the friction involved. We're inherently lazy. We're lazy, and we're actually willing to get rid of more of our privacy than, and I'm guilty of this myself, than I ever really realized. And when I really take a step back and I realize, wow, in order for us to operate in a lot of these digital ecosystems, we are checking those boxes when the things come up about cookies, and I'm not reading all that crap, but no. we're starting it away. And to your point, the European Union has started to deal with this with GDPR, and at the very least, they're trying to think about how to protect people. California and New York is starting here, but that's a long conversation. It's going to interrupt commerce. I hope there's some protections put in place, but there might be a lot of wiggle room around that, where by the time law is put in place, technologists can weave around it to get what they need.
So, it's funny. And I think maybe it's just an evolution of us as humans where change kind of scares the crap out of us, whether we like to admit it or not, but it's being comfortable with some of these people having this information, right? And I think we've gotten to a point where we're so off topic. I'm just going back and forth with you on personal experience, and I'm going to take the fault of that. Our last call, I'll blame you, but this time it's 100% me.
You're the guy.
Remember, I remember back when somebody first told me about Facebook was 2004. I want to say summer 2004, fall 2004. And I remember I logged onto Facebook for the first time and asked name, city, phone number. I got through like 3 or 4 fields, and I said, screw this. I'm not putting all that on the internet. There's no way I would ever have one of these stupid accounts. And now, I mean, the birth of my child is on there. Every important life event that's ever happened to me is on there. Every picture that I'm proud of is on there. All my literally my entire life is in digital form. And I remember that first thing I said was, no, I'm not going to do that. And then you fast forward and you go on certain websites and products start following you around the internet. But I have to say, some of the best new companies that I've found, whether it's apparel or devices or even technology, has been a targeted ad that's like, well, you like this crap, we know you're going to like our stuff. And it's like, the theory of that bothers me. It upsets me. But the fact that I was able to find a new awesome company because of the technology that they leveraged to find me, I'm very happy of. So I imagine that, and again, like I'm trying to understand your world more, which is why I'm going back and forth with this. So, and I'm so enamored by it. I have friends who do similar things, and it's just what you guys do, because it encompasses so many different walks of life, is so amazing. I imagine that's a big thought that you have to deal with every day, is you might have this big, wonderful idea, but it might be so far out there that you're like, hey, people may not be comfortable with that yet. We've got to take 10 steps to get there, right? We've got to start with ABC. So can you kind of talk us through how you balance all that?
Yeah. Comfort is a great word, and being comfortable, because there's this saying, everyone wants to innovate, but no one wants to change. Why? Because change is painful and it hurts and it's uncomfortable. So I try to put myself in those uncomfortable positions, because that's where the good, juicy stuff is. That's where you feel the pain. That's where you evolve. That's where you build the muscles, the brain muscles, right? Everything, and challenge yourself. So yeah, comfort is a big part of why we're okay, again, with letting go of our private data, because it feels like it makes us more comfortable, or there's value that we find in it, right, on a personal basis. And how do you make someone comfortable? You can't really force it upon them. it's all these variables that you speak about, culture and society. And that is why I love my job, is I get to learn through my clients about the world and their world, and not only how they make money overseas and here in America and other cultures, but like just generally how they think about data and security and making folks comfortable with giving us their data. So like you spoke about your first time on Facebook, right? Same here. I'm thinking about, wow, now we put our most precious thing, our children, photos of our children, and we haven't had too much of a conversation or an education as parents from our schools or from society about really how this could be abused or misused. There's a conversation about TikTok now and whether or not the Chinese government has direct access to the TikTok databases because of it being a Chinese company. But it's brought so much value to so many millions of people that people, myself included, are willing to let go of almost ultimate privacy, including pictures of our kids. So that's how we're lazy. And that's how we seek comfort above other things, because how many hacks have there been, right? Sony, and then government hacks too, but like commercial hacks, like an airline comes to mind, and some others. But the past 4 or 5 years,
Target was one of them as well. I'm blanking as well. All I can think of is Sony and Target right now, but I know there's been so many. Bank of America, I think, had one
Bank
too.
of America, but even
Wachovia,
and even the stalwarts, the Facebooks and the Googles, admit that there have been problems or breaches, or no, we gave, like Facebook, we gave this entity that might be tied to Russians or others, oh yeah, all this information. We didn't do our due diligence, and now they have access to more than we realize. So, and they have the most money, them and Google. So, and I think they just turned into 2 trillion, or is that Apple? Apple turned into a 2 trillion.
2 trillion, yeah.
Company. So, I mean, and they still have had issues over time with security and privacy, but they've done historically one of the best jobs of at least trying to protect people's data. But not anymore. I mean, we can't. They're going to get hacked if they haven't already. So what does that mean? The point I'm getting to is we've already seen it come to us and seen our information being hacked. I think we're okay with it. I think we want to know when it happens, but then we just throw up our arms and say, "Oh, my bank got hacked. I just got an email that says I got to change my password. Maybe they have my line of credit, and maybe in 3 or 4 years, this information will be on a black market." And we shrug our shoulders. Meh. Hopefully they don't steal my stuff.
Yeah. No, I think it's amazing the things that we have to get used to and the things that we have to consider from a business standpoint. Social media, and it's funny you talk about the hacks, and you and I mentioned the big ones, the Sony, the Target, the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica,
Right.
But I think small business owners, they look at themselves. And, I kind of equate small business owners sometimes to comedians, right? Because comedians have this mindset that what they like, oh, I'm not that great. I'm not as good as this guy or anything else. Small business owners, they don't a lot of times take a step back and look at what they accomplish to realize, like, you know what? You are big enough to be a target, and people are probably think that you're an easier target because you're not thinking that you're a target. And small businesses and everybody else are the ones that are getting picked off more so because they're not investing. They don't have the Facebook security team. They don't have the Sony security team. They don't have the Target security team. That's where a company like Wheelhouse would come in and be able to protect. If I can shamelessly plug our services, these small businesses to the level, I mean, the amount of effort and force it takes to break into a network like Sony or Target or Facebook, which is why this stuff hits the news, right? Because it was almost like a physical attack, like a bomb or something like that, but in the cyber world.
Operation. It was an operation, right? It's like a military operation. Yeah.
So it's interesting, man. And I can keep going on these rants and talk about security and everything else. But again, I told you I'm taking us so far. I want to get back to what you do and what you do at Dave Pappas Creative Studio, obviously. I'm fascinated by some of the projects you've talked about and the different ways that you approach clients, and like not just take on something because it's work, but saying, hey, why do you want to do that? What is the goal? What's the outcome? And then reverse engineer the steps to get to that goal. Do you have some recent projects that you can talk to us? I know some of the stuff you probably do is confidential, but some of the favorite projects that you've had in the past few years, and the stories behind them and how you've worked with them and the technologies associated with it.
Sure. No, great. That's a good question. So, Yeah, yeah. A few clients
It's
come to
like picking
mind.
your favorite kid. I know. So
I know.
let's.
Exactly, exactly. I want to discriminate against all the ones I'll forget in a moment.
We
But
can we
yeah, no,
can
I've worked
change the
on
name to protect the innocent.
some names I definitely can talk about. But I do mention that I work with a pretty wide variety of client types across many different verticals. You know, B2B, B2C, nonprofit, government. So the Federal Aviation Administration in DC has been a long time. I've been a long time subcontractor for almost 9 years with them, and years ago would help out with video presentations and website subsections of the FAA, and it's pretty straightforward data. And I'd also prepare congressional PowerPoint presentations for things like, when the FAA took over drone
Yeah,
certification
that's
and
cool.
took over space certification after NASA. I mean, they're handling giving out certificates to Elon Musk to launch his rocket tests in Florida. You got to go through the FAA and not NASA anymore to kind of get those certificates. And obviously with drones, you need to be certified to be a drone flyer. So I kind of learned a lot through this government client, the FAA, on what our American consumer culture was doing and taking this new technology called drones, and we couldn't really we weren't responsible enough to just fly them around, because the FAA very quickly said, no, we got to register each one, and you got to be a
Yeah.
pilot, because it can't be the Wild West. Too many people will get hurt. Not to mention the helicopters, and in New York City alone, there were like, I think, tens of thousands of near hits or misses in certain years, depending on how many drones are allowed to fly in the area. But um, where in the world was I going? What was the question?
You're talking about the projects that you're doing with the FAA and your favorite projects and the processes behind them.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was neat to work with the FAA for so many years, and they're still a client of mine. I'm just not as active these days with them, but it was neat to just interpret their culture, and their culture revolves around safety. Basically, revolves around the stories we tell each other internally in the government, and our partners, and the press, and the civilians, and everyone is, listen, we have safety top of mind. It's the DOT, the Department of Transportation, is the umbrella for the FAA, and anything that moves, anything that gets transported, people, cargo, that's the DOT. I worked in a niche aspect in the communications department in the FAA, and a couple times a year I go to DC to kind of say hello to folks and find out what's going on. But it's a fascinating world, because I get to see the culture, and how the culture drives the culture around safety drives the projects, right? So many of my projects, one with the FAA would be, okay, let's upgrade this section of the website that talks about airports and how much CO2 they've been expanding for 30 years. Because we have measuring devices at airports that over time we're putting toxins in the air depending on the airport and how big it is. So that needs to be monitored. And if it gets too much, that's not safe to have houses nearby. So there's always been regulations in place, and now with data and technology, it gets even easier to track and make decisions, although it depends on who's in charge, right, and where your focus is. But at any rate, the FAA was a great experience for me as a designer to understand that we're designing for keeping people safe, and we check ourselves. So the government is very slow. It takes a year to build a project for them. That would normally take 2 or 3 months in the private sector, but there's a reason for that. It's the reviews and the safety mechanisms, and the fact that technology may have just changed quickly and we have to pivot. So there are these interesting incentives that are different. It's about safety. So we're not going to rush, right? So Boeing's been criticized for this, right? Boeing rushed to market with their product,
Yeah.
and there may have been indications it was unsafe. And if they were the FAA and their culture was all about safety but not profit, they would have made decisions differently. But their culture is one of profit, and it's a very different one. So their decisions are going to be made leaning towards time to market, and safety may take a back seat. I'm not saying that with 100% certainty relative to Boeing, because I'm sure there are plenty of wonderful people that work at Boeing, but it's clear that there are issues and incentives that are different based on the culture that you're working with. So the culture at the FAA was such that I did feel good about, even though it was slow and sometimes difficult to get projects through there, I felt like I was serving a good design purpose. Let's get all this data on all the airports in the whole country, see which where CO2 is going up, where it's going down, establish new programs, but more importantly, let the public know about it, let business people and entrepreneurs know about it, right? Because there could be a new business that opens up in Texas simply because CO2 is down by half. We don't have to worry about it. It's not even an issue. So it's like, okay, we can have a new business by the airport. Also because sound decibels are down 75%. So there's new businesses that could occur because of the more quiet area. So it was neat to see how data and design could work together to make real societal impact through a government organization.
You must constantly be having to learn new stuff in order to do your job. I mean, to be able to talk about the CO2 levels at the airport and all these other things that you need to understand to be able to portray it correctly. I get the feeling that part of what you do, and not to dumb it down too much, is you have to take information that might otherwise come across as boring or not attention grabbing, and make sure that you're delivering it in a way that gets in front of people. Because like you said, safety, the safety at airports and the things that the FAA is responsible for saves lives. It's extremely important. But the way that our culture is right now, we're quick hits. Give me the information. Let me move on to the next thing. That it's very easy for people to dismiss these messages. And your job is to make sure that you're grabbing everybody's attention with stuff that could otherwise they wouldn't pay attention to. And that, I give you credit, man. That's not easy to do, to make some of this stuff, I will call it either entertaining or attention grabbing or eye popping, whatever it is. So I feel like it's just a constant learning process for you.
It is. It's a fun job because I'm in college all the time. I learn all the time. But to be clear, I don't become experts in this. My clients are the experts. The stakeholders that I'm dealing with, I trust them more than my own judgment. They're the subject matter experts. I lean to them. I am a translator, right? So I'm lucky and privileged enough to be in a position where I can hop between these tribes and translate with trust what a stakeholder at the government may want a designer or an engineer to know or understand that they can't maybe translate themselves. But I'm comfortable and confident enough to be able to be that in between middle person, right? To sort of translate, get work done, red flag problems. I mean, it's project management, but it's project management in a time full of heavy tech disruption and noise, and attention is short. So we need these specialists like myself to hire other specialists. But I lean on my clients to really be the masters of their subjects, and then I challenge them on that, which in and of itself is a great sounding board exercise. And then I can call myself the evil C word, a consultant, right? Because I'm just listening, but I'm also interjecting. I'm also, there's a reason we're going on this sounding board adventure together, because I'm putting, as a designer, I put the mirror to you, especially when it comes to branding, right? You need to kind of, really go through the painful exercise of asking yourself, who am I and what am I doing as a company? And why do we get out of bed and do the work that we do? And how do we express that? And do we do it transparently? Do we express that transparently? Or do we try to deceive? What is our posture? And I've worked for all sorts of organizations that the culture runs everything, man. Like the leadership, the culture, the vibe from the top down is what ultimately decides, your process. So we've talked a little bit about, process, but it's really completely different for the FAA, how I synthesize and process information and then instill a process than it is with a new startup that's launching a new app or something like that, right? So for example, I'm working with two other freelance partners of mine who are, I can talk about this project because it's quite public. It's a project that was between IBM and Altran called Call for Code. They've done it for a few years. The 2020 Call for Code was, okay, coders and engineers who, by the way, are all working remotely and at home. Let's try to do something about this COVID pandemic. What can code bring to bear to help us get some more safety or more clarity, that kind of thing. And each year IBM has a different theme, but this year was, okay, my client, Altran, happened to win this year's Call for Code. There were many participants. But now I'm getting to talk about the story about how my client partnered with IBM to build this app, which is essentially a tracing app to monitor engineers who are going to work, both physically or even remotely. It's a basic, simple app that we're seeing on a lot of websites we go to now, including apple.com or anywhere, any big, they'll have a COVID bar at the top, and you'll click the button in it, and they might have a tracking tool to track your symptoms. It's a health tracker, right? And again, this we can go off a tangent about trust and comfort, but the idea is engineers at IBM, are getting sick in great length in India. It's been hard to contain the tens of thousands of outbreaks that are happening in different areas, but IBM is concerned about their engineers, especially in India. So it's about their safety. So the idea is I get to now dive into, without being an expert in medicine, at least understanding the idea. You wake up, you check the app before you go to work. Do I have a fever? Duh, don't go to work, right? Yeah. But as silly as it sounds, right, there is this competitive nature to our field where we go to work even if we have fevers, even if we're sick. So we're working against that, and it's our own faults. We've built this culture of working 7 days a week, and it's hard to find that sacred time, but we've got to fight for it because we're fighting for our position, especially in a place like India where you lose your job, there's someone else right behind you. Folks are going to be going to work with fever. So this is sort of this is a formalization of, no, you told me you have a fever. That's you got to stay home. You work from home, and we're doing that now anyway. But the idea is that's a very direct case of a cultural epidemic that we're dealing with. It's had great impact. All of these big enterprise companies are dealing with it. I'm lucky enough to have this conversation with one of my larger enterprise global clients that has got IBM's attention and works for IBM often on these kinds of endeavors. So it has been interesting to talk to the engineers on the ground in India, that I do this every day. We interview them on Zoom. We have a webinar around the subject. They talk about how they're doing this for their fellow engineers, but also the passion that the engineers had for building this app and then scaling it massively, which is difficult to do. So that's also another fun, thing that I'm currently in the middle of, building video assets for and branding a story and a messaging campaign around.
Dude, that is an incredible project that you're working on, and there are a few things I want to address in what you just said. I think, first of all, the culture of working 7 days a week here. I think some of us kind of get this bug where we get to do what we love for a living, and you're definitely a phenomenal example of that. So I think it's hard for you to not want to work 7 days a week because it sometimes it's just not work. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, yes, there's gonna be days where you're like, I can't do it today, but there are so many things that you get to work on that you love that it's probably hard to take your mind off of it, right? And we all have to take that step back, going back to your screen breaks and everything else. But I think one thing that I hope changes going forward, and I know you and I have had this conversation, the evil C word, consultant, right? I would love to figure out a new term that can be used, because when I think of consultant, I think of the old days, the McKinsey and Company people, and the ones that would come in and they would, with the nice suit, and I don't think that that's the world that you live in, and that's the world that anybody else lives in anymore. It's not a big consulting firm, and that's what they do. But I think we're in a place where it's 2020 and people are really good at different things. Everybody's good at their own thing. And it's always good to bring in someone who has different experiences. Like for you, you don't have experience being the creative director for one company, and that was your mission, and that's all you've known, and that's the 24 years of experience that you've had. You have the experience of working for many companies and many projects and a little of this and a little of that. And to me, that makes you more valuable than somebody who spent all their time 20 years at IBM or 20 years somewhere else, right?
Well, it depends. So it depends. I got to stop you there because I'm questioning this in myself a lot. I'm this generalist, and I don't go niche or too deep, but I put people together, and that is tough sometimes to be, because generalists like me do actually work great in a nimble, scrappy environment to get something spun up and get it out there. But I'm actually terrible at governing long term, and because I'm moving on to the next thing to break and rebuild, and that's kind of an important theme to just maybe go off on a tangent on for a second. Is my job as a designer and a design operations person is to sort of come into an organization and help them with their design operations and basically help them organize, manage, and mature their design output. And they're doing something. They may have a designer, they may have a freelancer, They may have no one and do project by project, but there's some sort of design operation happening where you're designing something, words, visuals, programs, platforms. Design is a very broad term and word, and it could be applicable across anything, right? You could design a system to take advantage of people and then build assets around that, or you can design a system or platform to empower people and then decide, well, how are we is it a nonprofit? Do we get investment for it? Or is it a revenue model to actually both make money and empower people? And as designers, often someone like myself comes in on the tail end, and I've kind of lost the battle already of contextual awareness. So my job the past 15 years has been fighting to get into the C-suite with the chief technology officers and the CEOs and the CMOs and make sure that I'm involved in the conversation with the leaders, because when you don't have a representative of someone in the design field, someone that like me who does think a lot and care a lot about empathy and means it, I'm not throwing it out as a buzzword. I want to empathize with the customer, the end result, and the impact of what we're doing, or else I may not be on board. Oh, you're going to sell cigarettes to kids? Well, good luck. I guess if it's legal, you could do it. But I don't want to be a part of that endeavor, because I'm just not interested, right? In the impact that's going to make. I'm interested in the impact your organization or this initiative will make here, and a lot of it comes down to the culture of that organization. Yeah, I went off a bit of on a tangent, but feel free to rein me back in.
I mean, but I think that's the point I'm trying to get across is I see so much value in bringing in outside support and people like you in 2020 that it should the word consultant shouldn't be a bad word anymore. The word outsource shouldn't be a bad word anymore. Now, if you're going to outsource to child labor, then yeah, it is a bad word. But that's what we do here at Wheelhouse. We're essentially, to the unsexy term of it, is outsourced IT. But for the most part, you're going to get an entire company helping you out for less than the cost that you would hire an IT team for, right? And it's not just on cost, but it's also the value, the expertise. And it goes back to a term that I love to hear. Nobody's as smart as all of us, right? So to bring in people to contribute to that, I think is the way to do it. There's somebody who's in more of an up and coming speaker that I've become friends with, and she made a video the other day. Her name's Cody Sanchez, great person to follow, on Kylie Jenner. And she talked about Kylie's cosmetic company, and that essentially Kylie's cosmetic company was her and 4 contractors. Now, obviously, Kylie Jenner has the money to put out stuff, but she sold 51% of her company for $600 million. And not I want to say all she was doing, but she brought on a Dave Pappas. She brought on a Wheelhouse IT. She brought on people to do this for her, focus on this, focus on this. No, you don't need to give up everything you're doing. Come work for me full time. I need your expertise to lend to me, and we're going to do this together. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that in 2020. And obviously, I never thought that I would bring Kylie Jenner up on a professional podcast, but I don't see that being a bad model anymore. I don't see Kylie Jenner working with Dave Pappas. And Kylie, if you're watching our show for some reason, Dave's right here, as being a bad thing and not having to have you on full time. I see that as more of an advantage than a disadvantage these days. So Dave, I think your business and your model is definitely, you seem to be someone who's always ahead of the trends. And I think it's definitely something that is going to be the mainstay going forward from now on. Dude, we've been talking for over an hour now, which I fully expected, but I want to, I think we might have a part 2 or something like this. We talked about a lot today, but let's give people where they can find you and anything else, because part of this you've been a very good friend of Wheelhouse, and we want to make sure that we can help promote you.
Thank you so much. No, it's been a great help to extend it and talk a little bit further about how as a designer I do like to come in and break things so that we can innovate, and how there's tension that comes into play with that, especially with engineers and others. So there's a lot I think that you and I could kind of get into the weeds with. So thanks so much for having me on, and also for allowing me to kind of talk about my relationship with Wheelhouse for a second. For many years I've known Adam Kaplan and Nick Bardo have been good friends of my studio. So I just want to thank them. I'm feeling very gracious for this opportunity to talk about work, because it is so much fun. You're right, Todd. My job is fun. I'm super lucky that I get to learn about the world and be in a position to sort of talk about technology with folks like you and get to have a relationship with a company like Wheelhouse IT that really does empower the little guy, like you're saying, these bike shops and these smaller co-working spaces that don't have an IT infrastructure or security frameworks to even know how to think about things. They got to be shook up. I wouldn't know what it would be like to own a restaurant now and think about, okay, now am I going to think about my IT as a restaurant owner, hoping that someone's not stealing my customers' information? How do I even think about that or build an infrastructure around that? And that's why I think Wheelhouse is a great company for those kinds of answers to deliver for the little guy. And I'm doing the same as an independent consultant, and like you said, Todd, let's find a new word. I'm a flow master. I'm a translator, but I'm a design operations consultant that really cares about why we're designing something, who we're designing it for, and the ultimate impact it's going to make. And it's been a pleasure to be able to talk about that for a little bit with you. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Well, as things start to get back to normal, my plan is to convince Nick to come down, bring his kids down to Disney World so I can meet them up there. I know Lakeland's not too far away from Orlando, so maybe we'll all convene, in the House of the Mouse and go off on tangents till about 2, 3 in the morning. But I look forward to that, man, and thank you so much for being on.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Todd.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for watching. This has been another episode of In Your Wheelhouse, and we will see you next time.